Hello, everyone. I'm Anshu Agarwal. I am CEO and co-founder of Nimbella. Nimbella is an enterprise serverless cloud platform, and we started Nimbella 2 years ago, and we are on this journey of bringing serverless to everyone and all developers of any skill level. So today, my guest is Mr. Pranab Chakraborty. He is Cloud Engineering Manager at Intuit. And Pranab, welcome to this. Welcome to the show. And if you would please introduce yourself and tell me what do you do at Intuit?
Thank you, Anshu, and thanks for providing me this platform and opportunity to discuss for in regards to the today's topic. So, my name is Pranab Chakraborty, Cloud Engineering Manager at Intuit. I have been in Intuit for last 5 years and have been privileged to be part of some amazing technological shift of migrating from in-house data center to cloud hosting platform. In my 18 years of career, I have predominantly worked on infrastructure domain with expertise being on cloud engineering and operation. Some of the data center technologies like hypervisors, database, and storage technology. So Anshu, in my current role, I'm helping Intuit building and managing the services that are aimed at providing best-in-class security, cost, and velocity of operating in the cloud. So what we do at Intuit, our mission is to power prosperity around the world. We want to make sure and help our customer file taxes, manage their finances, and their accounting needs. And Intuit India is an integral part of the organization, and ton of development in the cloud happen from Intuit.
Wonderful, wonderful. So I am an Intuit customer, both at work for my business as well as at home for my taxes. So I'm glad to have you here today. Okay,
Sure.
so Pranav, I'd start with like where is the future of cloud computing headed? And so we started at it was bare metal before when you would buy servers, put it in data center, and then you move to infrastructure as a service, then platform as a service, container as a service, and now function as a service, which is aka serverless. But where do you see this future heading further? I mean, what do you think? Where would we be in 5 years?
Uh, that's pretty interesting phase, Anshu, where we are now. And as you rightly said, right, the emergence of the technology over the period of time has been quite significant. So, to my view, my opinion, I would like to broadly categorize into four bucket where I see the future of cloud computing is heading towards, and it's in a no way any sequential manner. I'm just taking the names based on how do I see them. So first is the adoption of multi and hybrid cloud. So if you see or if you go a decade back, most of the organization were pretty hesitant in how they want to adopt the cloud, and that's because they were pretty they were not confident on how the data will be secure and how the data will be consumed by the users on the public cloud. So the decade ago, 2009, 2010, the footprint for cloud adoption was pretty minimal, and that was not surprising. But in last 10 years or so, the advancement of what we are seeing in the tool sets and the technology, and the credit should go to the cloud providers. There is a paradigm shift in the mindset of the organization. So what used to be the blocker for the decade has become a driving factors for the organization to move into the cloud. So cloud organizations are more confident in putting their data in the cloud because they feel the cloud providers will provide them world-class security services and will have them have their data secured. So, so presently where we stand is there is a lot of organizations which are already operating in the cloud, and the future what we're seeing is there is a great choice of cloud services available to the organization. So now they have a choice to which service they want to select from a specific vendor. So hence the choice for a multiple and hybrid cloud will be pretty high in the coming times. And some of the benefit they can extract from multi and hybrid cloud is like scalability and portability. And if you think of technologies like Kubernetes, which can orchestrate your containerization environment, edge computing, which can help you to take you closer to the users, and serverless computing, which we are going to talk about more in today's discussions are absolutely fitting to these needs. The second observation which I am seeing is in the domain of big data, data analytics, and data science.
Okay.
Although these terms are being used quite loosely, but big data, data analytics, and data science itself in a big is a huge domain, and they are trying to solve the amount of data what organizations are originating and collecting to have a business logic or solving the business problem for the users. And it's quite interesting to see the advancement that is going in this field. um, None of the organization wants to miss any of the data what is being created. They want to capture and they want to process and have an analytics done to make sure they figure out the opportunity to solve business problems. So we see the emergence of technologies like machine learning, artificial intelligence, quantum computing, which could be a big go in the coming times or the future. Third one I see is the automation. Automation has to blend in whatever foundation services which are operating in the cloud. So it goes without saying the company who has a better automation processor in place are more effective or efficient to solve the customer problems. And some of the automation technology what we see for the futures are like robotic processor automations, which will be a big say in the coming times. Number last or number fourth, but not the least, the security, which is the primary pretty important domain for all the organization for the futures. So it's not about how you want to secure your data in the public cloud. You want to make sure you have a very defined process and policies in place to make sure you tackle your security related incident, how you want to encrypt your data at rest or in transit, how you want to manage the authorization and authentication. So to my view, these are the four domain where we are placed now and in futures is going to evolve over the period of time.
That's a great summary of where we are headed. Thank you for that. So we're going to double click on one particular one, which is serverless computing, and I want to ask you, how does it fit in Intuit's cloud adoption, where you are in your journey, and how many what percentage of workloads would you characterize as are running on serverless computing paradigm?
Yep. That's absolutely an interesting topic of discussion, Anshu. So several years back, we did this calculative strategy change in how we are operating. So we migrate from our on-house in-house data centers to infrastructure as a service, and then we moved to platform as a service. And now, over the last few years, we are operating as a function as a service, which is primarily what we call as a or associate with serverless computing. So we have several hundreds of server functions which are running in our environment, and to put a number, 90% of those functions incur no cost, because the way we have designed, and they fall under the free category of the cloud providers. So so some of the best practices what we follow are like we have make sure we keep our serverless functions for a limited executions, and these are some of the foundations for how you want to operate in a serverless computing. So our execution time for the functions what we define to solve a business problem, we have make sure those are minimal. It does not run for a longer period of time, because that will defeat your purpose for adopting the serverless computing. Number two, we try to limit the data processing functions. If you require a very complex data processing functions, then you have to make sure you do a very detailed analysis of what will suit you best. It will be a container solution which can help you much better than container service, along with the serverless computing can help you to solve it much better than just going through serverless computing alone. Uh, we also try to avoid concurrent functions running at the same time, because that can create a huge overhead for the developers, because there could be so many changes and you could be in a mix of loop and figure out what's wrong or which logic is causing problem in solving the business problems. Um, we also make a calculative strategy in making sure we select appropriate resources for our serverless function, so that it does not incur cost, because cost is one of the driving factors for serverless computing. So Anshu, if you see, the emergence of serverless computing is not new. It's there since 2014, and it's still quite strange. And means I really like the fact that some of the cloud practitioners or technology experts, they still talk about serverless computing as the emerging technologies, that because it help you to harness the scalability of the cloud. So what that means is you can scale up to unlimited limit, depends on your cloud provider what you provide, and you can absolutely scale down to zero, which means you don't pay for anything when you don't require it. um, it's fit absolutely okay if you have use cases which are event driven. So event driven architecture suits perfectly for serverless computing. It's a pay for you go capability, so you pay for what you use. And some of one of the important factor which I've seen in serverless computing, as a developer, you don't have to focus on the underlying platform or the underlying infrastructure, what is running. You just have to focus on developing your code and putting your business logic to solve the problem. So for Intuit, these factors are fitting very well, and that's how it's fitting in our future of things. And most of our modern applications, where we use our microservices and distributed computing, we see serverless computing a big help in solving our problems.
That's great, Pranav. I think Intuit is far advanced than most companies in adoption of serverless computing, and some of the things that you said, like execution duration and all that, is, I guess the cloud architects at Intuit have considered these things in the design of the system. So, do you have like legacy applications that haven't moved, or you have moved even the legacy applications in serverless computing paradigm?
Yeah, so that analysis you have to done what exactly the legacy application is solving, what business problem is trying to solve. So there are a few categories which you have to evaluate before you do a migration, a legacy application to microservices or distributed computing. So as I said, right, if that application is doing a huge chunk of data processing, or if that application, the codes take longer time to execute, then at this point of time serverless may not be a correct fit for you. But if the legacy application suits the current need, or the modern application, like where you don't know, especially in fintech sectors, right, where you don't know how many users will connect, or if there's a spike, or if it's a low in user connection, those are the very classic cases for the server computing to adopt.
Like the tax time.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, bang on.
That's like the perfect time. It's like a big spike in April for us here.
Yeah.
Okay. So when you went through this journey of going through the various phases of it, did the developers have to be retrained to adopt this? I mean, did you have this in plan so that the developers are retrained, or it just happened like an evolution process?
So to answer this question, there are two aspects of it, Anshu. One, you don't have to retrain the developer, because the functions what you're going to write in a serverless computing can be written in most of the popular programming languages like Java, Python, and Golang. So from that perspective, you don't have, and developers are pretty much familiar of those popular programming languages. So you don't have to develop, or you don't have to provide a training to the developer on that front. But there is a second aspect of it. You have to make sure developer understand what are the use cases where the serverless computing fits in. So basically, the change in mindset. So there is a cultural change which needs to be come in. You have to make sure the developer understand what are the use cases where the serverless computing can fit in, and they can have a better, so that they can have a better control of the environment. So let me a little bit elaborate on what I'm trying to say here is, if you have a software development lifecycle already in place, which are using a traditional software development lifecycle methods, and you implemented serverless computing, you want to make sure your code pipeline, whether it's custom build or you have taken it from the cloud provider, you have complete control over it. So if you are implementing serverless computing, that does not mean you should have a loose control over it, and you should try to get the benefit with automation testing and deployment using your blue, green, or canary deployment approaches. Number two, it's pretty easy to scale up in serverless computing. So you have to make sure you keep an eye on how much, or a benchmark on how much you want to scale up, because that can quickly shoot your cost. So you want to
Yeah.
make sure you have those control in place. Number three, you want to make sure you capture the latency and the performance issues. So any of your, because you will be having a multiple server runnings and in the distributed environment, if one of them is not performing as per, or if one of them have a business logic of the code which is not so good, you want to make sure you have a observability data for those function and a control to make those changes. Otherwise you end up in spending much more than what you intended for. um,
Mhm.
Last but not the least, security and compliance. You want to make sure your data is secure and compliance, and have a central observability telemetry in place, so that you have a very highly regulated environment in place. So to summarize, you don't have to train developers in writing the functions for the serverless computing, but for the structure which I mentioned below, you may have to ramp up a digital training, and that's how we have done in Intuit. While educating our users through the public cloud education, we have done it through digital training, classroom courses, sharing the best practices in the industry, the white papers, videos, and multiple certification within the organization.
Okay. Well, thank you. That was that was very thought provoking. You mentioned security, and fintech companies are generally very worried about security threats because you have data, customer data, and you are dealing with sensitive data, anyways. Do you think serverless cloud addresses that point in a better way, or it doesn't change anything? It's a cloud service which is secure anyways, but does it address it better in your opinion?
Yeah, so I think that's security was one of the barrier for the adoption of the cloud in the last
Mhm.
decade. I think I we discussed about it, and that's the driving factor for today, because organization like, especially the fintech organization, right, the data is highly, needs to be highly secure. They have the confidence with the cloud provider, and they understand the kind of different security measures with the cloud providers provide can help them to have their data much more secure. So let me explain a little bit better about the structure of the financial company or the fintech company. So if you see a typical fintech companies, right, will have a customer, whether it's internal or external. It will have a integration with the external ecosystem partner, like the financial institutes, bankers, then payment system partners. They will have a app platforms which will help to solve the multiple user business problems, and then integration with the third party and the third party integrations. So to meet to the customer demand, the fintech industry, right, they want to innovate and adopt most of the cloud solution, like biometric authentications, virtual assistant, VR trading, and AI enabled claim processing. So if you see, right, all these feature like biometric authentications, virtual assistant, you want to make sure your data is completely secure. Who wants to access your data, and how they want to access your data. So as a developer, or as a company like we at Intuit, how we are going to solve that and want to provide that enhanced customer experience. So by if you try to leverage the old traditional technology, it will be quite difficult to incorporate those innovative solutions. So what we try to incorporate is by implementing the microservices, serverless architecture, data lake, and the threat detection at scale. So we try to implement those threat detection at a wider scale to make sure we provide those capability to the customer, and help them and provide them confidence that their data is at a secure hand.
Okay. So one thing, actually, I think it's a benefit of serverless is because serverless is small, short functions. It does reduce the attack surface.
That's
So,
right.
say for some reason something is compromised, and that happens, the attack surface is so limited that it actually helps the provider in securing other aspects of it,
Yep.
and the risk is, or the damage is minimal.
Correct.
Whereas if it is a monolithic service, and if the attack surface is much larger. Mhm.
Exactly. It's more modular. So as you say, right, it's
Exactly.
modular. It's distributed, right? So like that's one of the biggest advantage of serverless, right? You don't have to change the complex application structure. You would just work on that modular piece of that microservice. So
Yes.
that's where it it's a huge plus.
Yeah, absolutely. Okay, you also talked about analytics, okay, and it is important for your customers. It is important for the company, for your Intuit. But does serverless help you get the right data at the right time? Because it's so modular. Does it help with that, so you can create a customer value faster and better?
Yeah, so what part of analytics you want to solve, right? So that's the important questions. Serverless is not built, maybe it's evolving, it's not built to have a complex data processing to figure out your analytical piece. Where serverless can help you is any event driven, right? If anything which is triggered by your customer. For example, if you have a care agent, if it's triggered by a chat, or if it's triggered by a call, if it's triggered by a data point, right? Serverless can provide you those event-based architecture and then help you to execute that specific piece of query which customer wants. So it can be very specific to what customer need and help you to provide a very satisfied customer experience. So as a leader, right, you have to make sure you understand what part of analytics you want to solve and then feed those appropriate components to provide a better customer experience.
Yeah, well said. Okay. So, I mean, Intuit has been a long-term vendor in the financial sector. Do you think serverless solutions are going to dominate the financial sector in the future, or Intuit is the leader of the pack, and it's like the others are going to follow much later?
But I think each and every company will take the way their business model is being laid out in the market. So based on that, right, the business you are in, which sector of finance sector you are trying to solve for the customer. So for us, we have a seasonal support where we solve for the user taxes, and we do have a specific season where we see the number of users spike, going up and then going down. So we know the periods, right, when we need our environment to be scaled up and scaled down. So during those kind of situation, we try to make sure we balance our environment so that it can automatically handle the scaling part. So some of the places we have implemented serverless technology, and also we have gone back some of these not better, maybe some other mix of hybrid technologies which can solve and provide a robust solution to the users. So to answer your short, which fintech area you are trying to solve for the customer, the serverless computing can be help you to solve the problem.
Okay, all right. So you mentioned, I mean, earlier that cost was one of the big reasons, but was cost the main reason for adopting it, or was it the rapid development and deployment part of serverless that attracted Intuit, or was it a mandate? Somebody did analysis and said, this is how we should do modern cloud native development. So what drove Intuit to go on this path?
Cost is not a primary factor. Cost is one of those factors to adopt for the cloud computing, serverless computing, but not the primary factor. We also take consideration of how it's fitting in our ecosystem, and as you said, right, how we can leverage the other benefits of serverless, like it's more modular. You don't have to rewrite the complete application stack, right? You just focus on that specific customer requirement and then create that specific function to solve the problem. So along with this, I think along with the features what serverless computing provide, the cost comes with it. So and if you follow some of the best practices, then you can have a better cost optimization policies or processes in place. And I think that's what we try to solve at Intuit. So we try to make sure we get the best of breed of the technology what are being offered, and what are the classic use cases which are going to solve by adopting, in this case, like serverless computing.
Okay, all right. And talking about the technologies, because you should use the right tool for the right job. Okay. So there are very data intensive jobs that you don't use. You probably don't use serverless for. what are I mean, you mentioned Kubernetes also. So a lot of your workloads are probably container-based workloads also.
That's right.
So what is the level of use of Kubernetes? Do you like kind of normalize on Kubernetes, or do you use Kubernetes in a particular workload scenario? What would be an explanation there? Mm-hmm.
So when we migrated to public cloud, obviously we migrated, we put our workload in the compute which our cloud provider has provided. But our strategy going forward, after once we have completely once we're done with our initial phase of our migrations, but our next strategy is containerization, because containerization what provide is it give an isolation environment from the hardware, right? And it's provide you some of the benefit, like it comes with the application pre-built and the environment, and you don't have to create anything from the developer points of view. You just have to put your application code there, and using Kubernetes as a orchestration tool, you can better manage that whole environment. So containers, Kubernetes is a big thing of scheme at Intuit, how we operate, and and serverless computing complements to what we are trying to solve as a complete app stack. So we have a huge footprint of Kubernetes, and going forwards, our strategy and focus will be on Kubernetes with the kind of features and the other benefits it provides. So obviously, it's in our bigger strategy.
Okay. And you also mentioned multi-cloud, and one of the reason I guess Kubernetes is very popular is because you get a cloud normalization through Kubernetes.
Yes.
And are you multi-cloud today, or are you moving towards multi-cloud? What is like there was a survey by I guess IDC and Forrester, and it was like most companies are moving towards multi-cloud, and it is not just something that it's a nice to have, it's kind of a need to have necessity. So where are you where is Intuit on that continuum?
Yeah, so we are in this very classic journey, right? We are already operating in a cloud with one of our cloud vendors, our cloud providers, and as part of our multiple acquisitions and um, the merger with the different partners, right? We do have an environment for the other cloud providers.
Uh-huh.
So we are a situation where we have more than one cloud provider operating. Um, so that's the next challenge, or the next feature of things, right? How we want to make sure how we operate in the multiple different cloud providers environment. But at this point of time, our majority of the workload and the processing are happening through a single cloud vendor. But that's absolutely in our strategy, right? So depend on your business requirement and how you scale up your ecosystem. um, it's an open thought, and it's an open strategy, right? How you want to adopt going forward.
Okay. And probably you mentioned it earlier, but it would be great to reiterate. So, are you at all on premise?
We have closed down our data center sometime last year back, so we have completely shut down our data center.
Uh-huh.
Most of our data are out of private data center which we used to own. So at presently we are operating completely from the public cloud, with very small footprint for the network connectivity devices and for some of the data compliance need, where we have to have a local storage in place, but that footprint is very minimal. But our journey has been awesome, and we are completely operating from the public cloud provider platform.
Okay. And what has it done to your costs? Not just operation like infrastructure cost, which is servers and all, but also people costs, because the one of the benefits of serverless and cloud computing in general is that you are moving so much of infrastructure burden to the cloud vendor that you can actually retool your workforce to provide value to their business value to the organization and not just manage infrastructure. So could you comment a bit about that? How it's impacted costs in general?
Sure. Yeah. So cost is a big um, topic of discussion when you operate with the public cloud. It's easy
Yeah.
to, once you move here, right, it's very easy to go things haywire. So we at Intuit, right, we have a very detailed cost optimization program in place, where you want to make sure how you're going to operate in the cloud, and making sure how better you understand your wastage. So because the cloud providers can provide you unlimited capacity in terms of whatever
That's
resource you want
good.
to consume, and it's
Yeah.
pretty easy for the developers or pretty easy for the users, right, to go and just deploy whatever they think like. So putting
Mhm.
those benchmark, right, and the cost optimization effort is pretty important for the organization. So you have to make sure you have a detailed um, structure and process in place, how you want to consume the resources from cloud. So what I mean is, you basically understand what is your runtime cost, what is your wastage, how much you should be right sizing, where you're over provisioning, what is your underused resource utilization, and the other important point, what you just explained, right? The mindset of the people, how they want to consume.
Uh-huh.
So it's a human nature, right? You just go ahead and spin something and then forget about how it's performing.
Forget about it.
So
Yes.
yeah. So you want to make sure you have those control in place, and someone telling you, right, where you're operating at and where you should be operating at. So creating those benchmarks, creating those baseline is pretty important. And I'm telling you that that can go anywhere if you don't have those control in place.
Yeah, it's truly capacity on your fingertips
Yes.
because you just don't even have to think. You turn it on and you forget. It happens to everybody when the month end the cloud bill comes in. Oh my gosh, how is it this much? we
Correct.
we all have gone through those motions. But I also wanted to ask you regarding costs. So the biggest cost to any company is not just the operations cost, which is machines and equipment and all that. It is people costs.
Yes.
And because so much of the burden is taken by the cloud vendor regarding operating your infrastructure, you have people resources available who used to manage infrastructure, whose sole job was to manage infrastructure, are now available. So how has it impacted the efficiency of the company? Because this is one of the benefits that comes with serverless specifically, because your entire organization can now be working towards adding value and not managing infrastructure. Just wanted to get uh, your own personal experience on how it's impacted.
Yeah, this is a very pretty relevant question, Anshu, and that's what we have experienced, right? So this is a journey which organizations should understand. This is a journey, right, over the period of time where you are moving from your data centers to the cloud, and at the same time, your people who are helping you to solve the business problem are also, right, part of this journey. So how you want to reskill your existing people? Uh, so getting those new skills which are required for the organization in the coming times, and make sure you have that policy and strategy in place, whether how you want to make sure your people are getting reskilled. Second, putting that mindset in the people, right, that the change is constant, means what they used to be doing earlier is not they will be doing or should be doing in the coming times. So I think that's play a major role, and I have seen majority of the people who used to be pretty dominantly data center system engineers, right, managing the network, managing the systems, compute, database, storage, they have, most of them has been reskilled to DevOps, because most of them reskilled to the SREs, right?
Okay.
So they understand the new world of um, how to help application better perform, scalable, and then part of that whole process. Um, there could be cases where people don't want to change, or they don't want to change their skill set. I think there is no other option, right, to make sure we took those calls. So this is a part of journey where you have to make sure you help people adapt to this change and have that mindset in what's coming in the future, and that will be true in coming times. What we are operating now and what is going to operate in the future, that is also going to change. There are many things what people are doing now will be automated, will be done through some other technologies. So it's a never changing, it's a evolving phase we are going through, and the change will be the only thing which will be constant, which every one
Yeah.
of us knows, right? So
Yeah.
So it's the culture of the organization, how you want to make sure you help people to be part of that journey, because
Mhm.
people are the greatest asset for any company. So I think that's pretty important to make sure you help people and also have that mindset imbibed in them, right? To understand the changes which are coming in your landscape.
Yeah, and what I have found is people really enjoy, once they have adopted the change,
Yes.
they really enjoy adding business value rather than working on the infrastructure, which is not
Correct.
core to the company. So the
Correct.
core of Intuit's business is creating financial software
That's right.
and which adds value to the customers, and that's what they're doing now. So even though the change, they may be resisting change at some point in time, they eventually really, once they take it, they love it, and that's what I have found. So Intuit is pretty advanced in their journey. What advice would you give to the organizations? Okay, which is what's the good, the bad, and ugly of going on this journey? How to avoid the pitfalls? What are pitfalls to avoid? And how to reach this great place where they can actually really truly add value or develop at the pace of innovation? What would be your advice?
So I think the first and foremost is to have a very strategic discussion of whether you really want to go to public cloud or not. If you want to, if you're trying to move from the data centers to public cloud, because they have seen organization, right? They are not completely 100% committed in the journey, and that generally takes a lot of time, because your developers are not convinced, your business leaders are not convinced, right? So have that very clear strategic direction where you want to move and why you want to move. What are the value additions which will be provided when you move from your current way of operating to the new world. So I think laying out those detailed and very clear thought process is pretty important, and that's what we have seen. Because if you're not aggressive in what you want to adopt, it will be you will be in the turmoil, right? Whether to go that direction or whether to come back to that direction. And how you're trying to solve your business or your customer problem, where you want to be in the game. Do you want to be the innovative leaders? You want to be the leaders? You want to be follower? So where do you want to be where do you want to see yourself fitting in the overall competitive age of this world, right? So based on that, you should define your strategy and go forward, go aggressively go towards it. So that's what I think I have seen when we were in the journey, right? When we got our clear messages from our leaders, and the thought process was so clear, it made full sense to us, right? Where we are now, and then 5 years back, where or 5 or 10 years back, right, where we used to be.
Okay. That's great, Pranav. It was very insightful conversation. Thank you, and hoping to have you at some other time again, where you can talk more about where you are in this journey and what other efficiencies you have found. Thank you for your time today.
Thank you, Anshu. It's my pleasure.